He was not supposed to go back into the fire, not after what the smoke had already taken from him. But Atlas heard something inside that burning barn no human heart was ready to believe. The night over Ashford Creek, Kentucky, had turned the color of old blood and storm clouds, red light pulsing against the wet fields as if the whole farm were breathing through pain. Rain had come hard an hour earlier, soaking the pasture, darkening the fence posts, leaving silver beads along the tall grass. But it had not been enough. The barn still burned. Flames climbed the weathered boards in bright orange sheets, licking through the cracks beneath the roof, throwing sparks into the black sky where they vanished like tiny prayers. The air smelled of scorched hay, diesel, wet earth, and something sharper, something that made the throat close before the mind could name it. Men shouted near the gravel drive. A volunteer fire engine groaned beside the gate, its red lights spinning over white siding, over muddy boots, over faces lifted in helpless disbelief. Someone kept saying the barn was empty. Someone else kept saying to stay back. But the white German shepherd standing beside Staff Sergeant Isaiah Cole did not move like a dog that believed them. Atlas stood with his paws planted in the mud, his long white coat already smudged with ash, his ears forward, his pale amber eyes fixed on the mouth of the barn. He was 6 years old, broad-chested, disciplined, trained to stop when told and wait when ordered. Yet every inch of him trembled with a command that did not come from any handler. Isaiah felt it through the leash before he saw it in the dog's body. Not fear. Recognition. The kind that moves through bone before thought can catch up. Isaiah tightened his grip. He was 37, a black United States Marine with shoulders made by years of carrying packs, rifles, grief, and men who could no longer carry themselves. His field jacket was soaked at the collar. Rainwater ran from the brim of his cap down the line of his jaw. Firelight carved copper along his dark skin and turned the silver dog tags at his chest into small flashes of lightning. He had seen smoke before. He had seen buildings breathe heat like living things. He had learned the sound wood makes just before it gives way. That was why he knew the firefighters were right. Nobody should go in. Nobody. Atlas, he said, low and firm. Stay. The dog did not look at him. From the porch of the farmhouse, Mara Whitcomb stood wrapped in a gray sweater, one hand pressed against her mouth, her 8-year-old daughter Lily held close against her side. Mara kept shaking her head, whispering that the barn was empty, that the horses had been moved to the far paddock, that no one had any reason to be inside. Her voice was not lying, but it was breaking. Near the fire truck, Chief Daniel Briggs shouted for another line to be pulled around the north side. Caleb Ross, the hired hand, paced near the gate with his cap pulled low, his face pale in the emergency lights, repeating too quickly that he had checked the barn himself. Isaiah heard him, but Atlas heard something else. It came between the crack of burning rafters and the hiss of water hitting flame. A sound too thin for most people. A sound swallowed almost before it was born. Atlas lowered his head. His nose worked once, twice. Then he gave a soft whine that made Isaiah's chest go cold. He had heard that sound from Atlas only once before, 2 years earlier, after a training warehouse fire in North Carolina, when the dog had refused to leave a smoke-filled corridor until the last trapped recruit was carried out. After that day, they called Atlas too sensitive, unstable around alarms, too haunted for active work. Isaiah had never believed that. Some souls do not break because they are weak. They shake because they remember. No, Isaiah whispered, but the word was not an order anymore. It was a plea. The barn roof cracked above the main doors, sending a curtain of sparks into the rain. People stepped back. Atlas stepped forward. Isaiah braced, wrapping the leash once around his wrist. Atlas, stay with me. For one breath, the dog froze. His white head turned just slightly, enough for Isaiah to see the ash on his muzzle, the glow reflected in his eyes, the terrible mercy waiting there. Then the leash snapped tight. Atlas lunged with a force that tore Isaiah's boots through the mud. Atlas. The name broke from him as the dog ripped free and ran. Gasps rose from the yard. Chief Briggs shouted. A firefighter reached for him and missed. Atlas became a white streak against the red mouth of the barn, low to the ground, fast, silent except for the scrape of claws on wet gravel. He vanished into the smoke before anyone could stop him. For a few seconds, the world forgot how to breathe. Isaiah ran to the threshold, heat pushing him back like an open hand against his chest. The smoke rolled out black and thick, carrying sparks, carrying the groan of old beams, carrying the memory Isaiah had spent years trying not to hear. Not again. Not another soul beyond reach. He lifted one arm against the heat and called into the flames, his voice rough enough to tear. Atlas. Nothing answered. The firefighters held him back, not cruelly, but with the strength of men who knew what fire could take. Isaiah fought once, then stopped, staring into the orange dark as if his will alone could pull the dog home. Mara began to cry without sound. Lily buried her face in her mother's sweater. Caleb stepped backward into the shadow of the truck. Then, from inside the barn, there was a bark. Weak, muffled, alive. Every head turned. A shape moved behind the smoke. First only a blur, then a shoulder, then the white of fur stained gray and gold. Atlas stumbled out of the fire with his head held carefully high. His sides heaved. His paws slipped in the mud. In his mouth, clenched with impossible gentleness, was a small blue blanket, burned at one corner, wrapped around something no larger than a bundle of laundry. Isaiah broke free and dropped to his knees as Atlas reached him. The dog opened his jaws. The blanket fell into Isaiah's arms. For one heartbeat, nobody understood. Then the fabric shifted. A tiny sound rose from inside it, soft as a breath against glass. A baby boy, cold, soot-smudged, and alive, blinked up at the burning sky. The yard went silent. Even the fire seemed to lower its voice. Mara stared at the child, her knees weakening beneath her, her eyes fixed on a little silver bracelet around his wrist. Her lips parted, but no words came. Isaiah looked from the baby to Atlas, and Atlas, trembling in the mud, did not wag his tail. He turned his smoke-darkened face back toward the barn and growled low, because whatever miracle had just come out of the fire, the truth was still inside. The baby made one more sound, hardly more than a whisper, and that was enough to bring the whole yard back to life. Isaiah pulled the blue blanket closer against his chest, shielding the child from the rain with the curve of his body, while one of the paramedics sprinted toward him with a medical bag swinging at her side. Her name was Denise Harper, a calm woman with gray at her temples and the kind of hands that moved quickly without panic. She knelt in the mud beside Isaiah and took the baby with a gentleness that made even the firefighters fall quiet. "He is breathing," she said, pressing 2 fingers to the tiny neck. "Weak, but he is here." Those 4 words passed through the crowd like a bell. "He is here." Isaiah stayed on one knee, his breath still uneven, his eyes burning from smoke and something older than smoke. Atlas stood beside him, trembling so hard his collar tags clicked together. The dog's white coat was no longer white. It was streaked with black ash along the shoulders, singed lightly at the edges, damp from rain, and glowing orange where the firelight touched him. Yet he did not look at the baby. He kept staring at the barn. Low, locked, waiting. Mara Whitcomb stepped down from the porch as if the ground beneath her had changed shape. Lily clung to her mother's hand, her small face pale beneath the spinning red lights. "Where did he come from?" Mara asked, but it did not sound like a question meant for anyone outside herself. Denise laid the baby on a clean thermal blanket across the back of the ambulance stretcher, cleared his mouth with careful practiced movements, and wrapped him in silver emergency foil that caught the firelight like a broken star. "Ma'am, do you know this child?" Chief Briggs asked. Mara shook her head once, too quickly. Then her eyes found the silver bracelet around the baby's wrist, half hidden beneath the blanket. Something in her face changed. Not recognition exactly. Something worse. A memory waking up before permission. Isaiah saw it. So did Atlas. The dog gave another low growl, and this time it was not aimed at the fire. It was aimed toward the side of the barn, where a narrow service door hung partly open behind a sheet of smoke. Isaiah rose slowly, one hand finding Atlas's shoulder. The fur beneath his palm was hot and wet. "Easy, boy." Atlas leaned forward, muscles tight, every breath a rough pull. Chief Briggs grabbed Isaiah's arm before he could take another step. "Sergeant, I know what you are thinking. Do not." Isaiah did not look away from the barn. "He is still alerting. That roof is losing support. We are not sending anyone inside. I am not asking you to send anyone. And I am telling you, no one goes in." The 2 men stood in the rain, face to face, the fire snapping behind them. Briggs was not heartless. Isaiah could see it in his eyes. He had the exhausted stare of a man who had carried too many calls home with him. But Atlas did not care about rules written for ordinary nights. He pawed once at the mud, then lifted his nose into the smoke and whined. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin, broken sound that seemed to pass straight through Isaiah's ribs. 6 hours earlier, that sound had been the reason Isaiah had pulled off County Road 17 in the first place. He had been driving south through rolling Kentucky pasture, heading toward Fort Campbell for Atlas's final behavioral review. The truck heater had been humming. Rain had tapped softly against the windshield. Atlas had been quiet in the passenger footwell, head resting between his paws, too still for a dog who used to read every mile marker like a mission briefing. Isaiah had told himself this was just another evaluation, another clipboard, another officer deciding whether a wounded animal still had a purpose. But his hand had stayed on the dog's collar the whole drive. "They're going to ask me if you are ready," he had said, eyes on the wet road. "I wish you could answer for yourself." Atlas had lifted his head then, not toward Isaiah, but toward the dark shape of a farm beyond the roadside trees. His ears rose. His body went rigid. Isaiah slowed without knowing why. On the hill ahead, a white farmhouse sat under bare-limbed oaks, its porch light glowing soft through the rain. Behind it stood an old red barn, quiet, closed, ordinary. Nothing burned then. Nothing moved. Still, Atlas began to shake. Isaiah pulled onto the shoulder. "What is it?" The dog pressed his nose to the window seam and drew in a long breath. Then came that same sound. A whine made of memory. Isaiah had learned not to ignore it. That was how they first met Mara Whitcomb, standing on the porch with a coffee mug in both hands, her auburn hair pinned loosely beneath a knit cap, her tired smile polite but guarded. She had said the farm was fine. She had said the barn was only storage now. She had said a lot of things that sounded true enough until Atlas walked past the porch steps and stopped dead beside Lily's little red rain boots. The girl had crouched in front of him, unafraid, and whispered, "You are pretty, like snow with ears." For the first time all week, Atlas had wagged his tail. Isaiah had almost smiled. Almost. Then the wind shifted from the barn, carrying a faint scent beneath the rain. Not just hay, not just machine oil, baby powder, warm milk, old fear. Now, standing in the burning yard hours later, Isaiah understood what Atlas had known before anyone else was willing to see. The fire was not the beginning of the story. It was the cover. Mara moved closer to the ambulance, staring at the child as Denise worked to keep him warm. Lily looked from the baby to the barn and whispered something so softly Isaiah nearly missed it. "Mom, that is the crying I heard." Mara turned sharply. "Lily." The girl flinched, not from anger, but from the weight in her mother's voice. Isaiah felt the whole night narrow around those words. Atlas heard them too. He stepped away from Isaiah, toward the smoke, dragging his leash through the mud like a white flag dirted by war. Caleb Ross, who had been silent too long, spoke from near the gate. "Kids imagine things. There was nothing in there." His voice cracked on the last word. Atlas turned his head toward him. So did Isaiah. No one accused anyone. No one needed to. Sometimes guilt announces itself by trying too hard to sound ordinary. Chief Briggs lifted his radio and called for county deputies, his eyes still on the barn. The baby let out a stronger cry from the ambulance, small but fierce, and Mara covered her mouth as tears finally broke free. Isaiah should have stayed with that miracle. He should have let the professionals handle the rest. But Atlas took one step toward the side door, then stopped and looked back at him. Not begging, asking. Isaiah looked at the flames, at the sagging roofline, at the dog who had once saved men from places no creature should enter, and felt the old wound inside him open like a door. The last time he had heard someone call from smoke, he had obeyed the order to stay back. It had been the right order. It had saved other lives. It had also followed him home every night since. He bent down and unclipped the broken leash from Atlas's collar. His voice was barely above the rain. Not alone this time. Atlas touched his nose once to Isaiah's wrist. Then both of them turned toward the barn, where the fire kept its secrets behind a wall of orange light. Isaiah took a deep breath, the cold rain mixing with the warmth of the fire that licked at the barn walls behind him, and stepped forward carefully, feeling Atlas press close to his side, as though the dog's presence could shield him from the smoke and uncertainty. The barn was alive with sound now. Not just crackling timber, but the subtle creaks of floorboards stressed under heat and age, the whispered rush of air through cracks, and the faintest hint of life that drew Atlas's attention like a magnet. Every step Isaiah took sent a pulse of mud and water under his boots, grounding him, keeping him aware that he was not alone and that the dog beside him was not just following instinct, but guiding him with a kind of knowledge no human could possess. Atlas's paws slipped slightly, but he steadied himself, muscles taut beneath his white fur, ears pivoting constantly, eyes scanning shadows where light dared not reach. Isaiah's heartbeat matched the rhythm of his companion, slow, measured, anchored by trust that had been forged in years of training and silent understanding. He noticed the faint aroma of something familiar beneath the smoke, a mixture of straw, milk, and something metallic, and knew that Atlas had sensed it long before he had. As they approached the first partition of the barn, Isaiah crouched low, letting the dog move slightly ahead, but never letting him out of his sight. The dog stopped, head tilted, nose quivering, and then pointed forward with a subtle shift of his weight. Isaiah followed the gesture, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through smoke and ash. The sight that met him was simple yet profound. A small bundle tucked beneath a stack of hay, barely noticeable, moving slightly as though it knew it had been discovered. Isaiah's hands were steady as he moved closer, his body tense with anticipation but free of fear, each movement deliberate so as not to startle the hidden life waiting to be found. Atlas leaned forward, careful not to touch, then gave a gentle nudge with his nose, indicating that the path was clear and that the bundle was ready to be rescued. Isaiah carefully lifted the covering, revealing a small child, warm despite the chill in the air, eyes blinking up at him with a fragile trust that made every previous moment of hesitation vanish. The rain continued to tap softly on the roof, a gentle counterpoint to the chaos outside, and the firelight painted the child and the dog in a glow that made the world seem suspended, as if only these three beings existed in the universe at that moment. Isaiah whispered softly to the child, letting him hear a voice that carried safety and steadiness, and Atlas sat beside him, tail tucked but body still vibrating with quiet energy, watching, waiting, protective in a way that transcended training. The barn behind them shuddered with the heat, sending sparks like tiny falling stars into the misty night, but inside that circle of trust, nothing could penetrate. Isaiah adjusted the blanket around the child, ensuring warmth and comfort, while Atlas's gaze never left the shadowed corners, alert to any movement, any hint that danger remained. Mara and Lily appeared at the edge of the yard, faces pale but filled with awe, watching. Atlas and Isaiah returned, knowing instinctively that the child was safe, yet unable to fully grasp the miracle of timing, trust, and courage that had brought this moment into existence. The rain eased slightly, carrying away the sharpness of smoke and ash, leaving a scent of wet earth and straw, mingled with the comforting aroma of the child's small presence. Isaiah felt Atlas press against his side, a reminder that their bond was more than duty, more than training. It was an unspoken agreement to face the unknown together. In that quiet, stretch taut by the urgency of rescue and the fragility of life, every sound was amplified. The distant call of a night bird, the soft murmur of water running through gutters, the faint hiss of dying embers. The child stirred, a small hand curling around Isaiah's finger, and the dog let out a gentle sigh, the first exhalation of relief in the barn, as if acknowledging that the immediate danger had passed and that the grace of the moment could finally settle over them. Isaiah looked down at Atlas, his expression softening despite the tension that had gripped him for hours, and knew that nothing about the night would ever be ordinary again. Every step back to the ambulance, every careful maneuver over mud and scattered debris, was marked by shared understanding. Atlas would lead, Isaiah would follow, and together they had rewritten what was possible in the shadow of fire and smoke. Mara's voice reached them then, trembling but steady, calling the child's name softly, and Lily ran forward, her small hands reaching for the baby while Isaiah knelt, letting her approach, Atlas remaining a silent guardian, ears forward, body alert, eyes burning with quiet satisfaction. The fire behind them now seemed distant, almost respectful, as if acknowledging that its role had ended, and that life had been preserved through instinct, courage, and a bond that could not be measured by training manuals or rules. Each step, each glance, each heartbeat confirmed to Isaiah that the night had tested them beyond the ordinary, but also reminded him of the rare moments when preparation, loyalty, and pure intuition converged to create something beyond explanation, something that could only be called a miracle. By the time Isaiah reached the ambulance with Atlas walking close enough to brush his leg, the rain had softened into a fine mist, and the yard seemed to hold its breath around them. Denise Harper took the second child from Isaiah's arms with the same careful urgency she had shown before, but this time her face changed in a way that made Chief Briggs step closer without being called. The child was not a newborn. He was older, small for his age, wrapped in a faded quilt that smelled of smoke, milk, and cedar. His cheeks were pale beneath the soot, his eyes half open, his fingers curled around the edge of the fabric as if he had been holding on in the dark for a very long time. Mara stared at him from beside the ambulance, one hand still resting on the silver blanket around the baby boy Atlas had first carried out. Her lips trembled. For a moment, no sound came from her at all. Then she whispered, "Noah." Lily looked up at her mother. "Mom." The name seemed to leave Mara before she could stop it, pulled out by grief, shock, and a memory she had buried so deep it had become part of the ground beneath the farm. Isaiah heard it. Atlas heard it. Caleb Ross heard it too, and the moment the name crossed the wet yard, he stopped pacing. His shoulders tightened beneath his denim jacket. His eyes moved toward the county road, just once, but Isaiah saw it. Marines learn to notice the direction a man looks when truth steps into the room. Chief Briggs lowered his voice. "Mara, who is Noah?" Mara shook her head slowly, not in denial, but as if the question had opened a door she had spent years holding shut. "My son," she said. The words were almost too small for the night. "They told me he did not make it." No one spoke. The firefighters kept their eyes on the barn, but even their movements slowed. The baby in the ambulance let out a soft cry, and the older child stirred at the sound, turning his face slightly toward it. Denise looked from one child to the other, then back to Mara. She did not ask the question everyone else was thinking. She only wrapped the boy in a clean blanket and said, "We need to get both of them checked at the hospital." Mara pressed her hand to her chest as though something inside her had finally begun beating again, and it hurt. Lily took one step closer to the stretcher. "Is he my brother?" Mara looked down at her daughter, and the firelight reflected in her tears. "I do not know, sweetheart," but her voice said she did. Atlas, who had remained silent through all of it, suddenly lifted his head. His ears sharpened. His body turned toward the far side of the barn, not the main doors where flames still climbed, but the narrow storage wing half hidden behind a sagging lean-to. Isaiah followed the dog's gaze. That part of the structure was not burning as brightly. Smoke curled from its seams in thin, steady lines. Chief Briggs noticed at the same time. "What is back there?" he asked. Mara wiped at her face, trying to focus. "Old tack room. Feed records. My husband kept tools there before he passed." Caleb answered too quickly. "Nothing important. The roof is bad on that side. It has been locked for months." Isaiah did not turn toward him right away. He kept watching Atlas. The dog took 3 careful steps forward, nose low, then stopped beside a muddy rut where a tire track cut deep toward the service door. The rain had filled it with cloudy water, but not enough to hide that it was fresh. Isaiah crouched, brushing his fingertips near the edge of the track. "Someone drove back here tonight." Caleb gave a dry laugh that did not reach his eyes. "It is a working farm. Trucks go everywhere." Atlas growled. Not loud, not wild, just enough to end the conversation. Chief Briggs raised his radio again, asking how far out the deputies were, and the answer came through static that they were 4 minutes away. 4 minutes should have felt short. In that yard, with the barn still burning and the children breathing beneath emergency blankets, it felt like a lifetime. Isaiah stood slowly. His lungs ached from smoke, and his right hand shook just enough that he curled it into a fist before anyone could see. He was not invincible. He was tired. So was Atlas. The dog's front paws were tender from heat and mud, and black ash marked his white muzzle like a shadow. But he would not sit. He would not rest. His eyes stayed locked on that side room. Mara stepped beside Isaiah, her voice barely steady. "Sergeant, what is he smelling?" Isaiah looked at the old storage wing, at the fresh tire track, at Caleb's face under the red lights, and at the two children who should not have been in that barn at all. Not a person this time, he said. Something they did not want found. Lily suddenly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it in both hands. It was a wooden train, painted blue, chipped along one side. I found this last week by the barn, she whispered. Mom said it must have been mine when I was little, but it was not mine. Mara stared at the toy as if it had risen from a grave. Her knees weakened, and Isaiah moved instinctively to steady her. Atlas stepped forward then and touched his nose to the little train. He sniffed once, then turned back toward the storage wing with a soft, urgent whine. The deputy's sirens appeared in the distance, faint at first, then growing over the wet fields. Caleb looked toward the road again. Isaiah saw his hand move toward his jacket pocket, not fast, not threatening, just nervous, searching for something to hold on to. Caleb, Chief Briggs said quietly, keep your hands where I can see them. The hired hand froze. The fire cracked behind them, sending a shower of sparks into the mist, but nobody moved toward the sound. The night had changed shape. It was no longer only a rescue. It was becoming a reckoning. Isaiah bent beside Atlas and rested a hand against the dog's smoke-warmed neck. You already brought them out, he whispered. Atlas looked at him, eyes bright beneath the ash. Now show us why they were hidden. The dog turned, slow and certain, and led them toward the side of the barn where the smoke curled like a secret refusing to die. Isaiah followed Atlas carefully through the mist and mud, each step measured, alert to every sound, every movement that might indicate something hidden from view. The side wing of the barn loomed ahead, partially obscured by the curling smoke, its red paint streaked with rain and ash, old boards warped from years of weather, the roof sagging slightly under the weight of recent storms. Atlas paused at the threshold, nose twitching, ears sharp, scanning the space as if sensing the faintest presence of life. Isaiah crouched behind him, hand resting lightly on Atlas's back, feeling the tremor of the dog's muscles beneath his palm, a reminder that the dog was as aware of danger as he was of hope. Inside, the room smelled of dry straw, dust, and something softer, sweeter, the faint trace of soap and milk that had long soaked into the wooden floor. The sound that had guided them here was subtle, almost imperceptible, the soft murmur of breath, small, deliberate, a rhythm barely registering against the backdrop of the storm outside. Isaiah's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw the outlines of small objects partially hidden beneath a stack of crates and old feed sacks. Atlas moved forward, careful, precise, pushing a loose board aside with his nose, revealing a small cot tucked against the wall. On it lay a bundle swaddled in faded blankets, and the soft sigh of breath that came from within was unmistakable. Isaiah knelt and gently pulled the blankets back just enough to see the child, a boy with dark hair matted lightly with moisture, eyes wide and blinking against the dim light. His tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, as if seeking the warmth and comfort that had been absent for too long. Isaiah breathed slowly, letting the tension drain from his shoulders while Atlas remained at the threshold, ears forward, eyes unwavering, ready to protect, to alert, to guide. Mara Whitcomb stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the child's blanket, but she did not yet speak, as if afraid that breaking the quiet would shatter the fragile connection between the boy and the world he had been hidden from. Lily stayed close to her mother, clutching her small hand, peering into the shadows with awe and fear, her gaze bouncing between the child, Atlas, and Isaiah, trying to understand the sequence of events her young mind could not fully process. Outside, the rain softened further, dripping from the roof onto the ground in steady, calming rhythm, and the fire behind them had begun to die down in sputtering embers, as if acknowledging that its role in the night's story had reached an end. Isaiah adjusted the blankets around the child, ensuring warmth and security, and whispered softly so the boy could hear his voice, steady and calm, providing a tether to the living world outside the barn. Atlas let out a quiet, satisfied exhalation, his body relaxing slightly while still maintaining vigilance, the loyalty in his stance clear and unwavering. Chief Briggs arrived at the edge of the room, his presence authoritative yet cautious, eyes scanning the surroundings, taking in the subtle details that indicated no immediate danger remained in the space but understanding that the night had tested every measure of patience, instinct, and courage. Mara finally spoke, her voice a quiet mix of disbelief and relief, asking who the child was, while Isaiah gently guided her and Lily to observe without touching, allowing the boy time to acclimate to warmth, air, and the presence of living guardians. The child shifted slightly, opening his mouth in a soft whimper, and Atlas moved closer, nose low, signaling that the boy was safe but that the world still held questions, mysteries, and truths to be revealed. Isaiah kept one hand on Atlas, the other on the edge of the cot, sensing the connection between dog and child, understanding that the bond they shared in this moment of discovery and survival was profound and rare. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain, hay, and smoke, intertwining in a way that seemed to seal the memory of this rescue into the night itself. Each movement, each breath, each soft sigh from the boy was mirrored by Atlas's stillness and alertness, a silent promise that nothing would harm what had just been found, and that every heartbeat, human and canine alike, was now in rhythm with the fragile miracle they had uncovered together. The boy on the cot was alive, but the longer Isaiah looked around that hidden room, the more he understood that the child was not the only thing Atlas had found. Life had been kept here, quietly, deliberately, behind a wall that had been built to look like ordinary storage. A low shelf held folded blankets, clean bottles, a small canister of powdered formula, and a plastic basin still damp along the rim. Beside it sat a battery lantern, its light nearly gone, glowing a weak yellow against the smoke-stained boards. The room was not comfortable, but it had been used. It had been prepared. Isaiah felt the weight of that truth settle over him without needing anyone to say it out loud. Mara stood just behind Chief Briggs, one hand pressed to her chest, the other holding Lily close as if the little girl might vanish too if she let go. The older boy breathed softly in Denise Harper's arms now, wrapped in another silver emergency blanket, his eyelids heavy from exhaustion, his small face turned toward the sound of Mara's voice, though he did not know why. The younger baby had already been secured in the ambulance, warm and watched, his faint cries rising now and then through the open doors like reminders that the night had not taken everything it wanted. Atlas moved slowly along the base of the wall, nose brushing the floorboards, his paws careful but certain. He was tired. Isaiah could see it in the slight dip of his head, in the way one front paw lifted and set down gingerly on the damp wood. Still, the dog would not stop. Not yet. He sniffed beneath a workbench pushed crookedly against the far corner, then pawed once at a loose plank. Isaiah moved beside him and knelt. "What have you got?" he whispered. Atlas looked at him, then back at the plank. Chief Briggs handed Isaiah a small pry bar from a firefighter's belt without a word. The old board lifted with a soft groan. Beneath it was a narrow space wrapped in dust, and inside that space sat a canvas bank pouch, the kind used for farm deposits and county paperwork. It had been tucked away carefully, protected inside a plastic feed bag. Isaiah pulled it free and passed it to Briggs, who opened it under the fading lantern light. The first thing that slid out was a hospital bracelet, sealed in a clear evidence bag, the ink faded but still readable. Noah Whitcomb, male, born 8 years earlier at St. Agnes Medical Center in Bowling Green. Mara Mayday. Sound like the breath had left her body. Lily looked from the bracelet to her mother, confused and frightened by the silence that followed. "Mom," she whispered, "that is his name." Mara took one step forward, but Briggs gently raised a hand, not to stop her heart, only to protect what had to become evidence now. More papers followed. Birth records. A notarized form with signatures that did not look right. A photograph of Mara in a hospital bed, younger, pale, smiling weakly at a bundle in her arms. On the back, written in blue ink, were the words, "Our Noah, before the world knew him." Mara covered her mouth with both hands. No scream came. Only tears, quiet and endless, falling down her face as if 8 years of winter had finally begun to thaw. Isaiah looked away for a moment, giving her the dignity of not being watched too closely. Outside, deputies had arrived, their cruisers parked with lights pulsing across the field. One of them, Deputy Alan Reese, a broad man with a rain-darkened hat and careful eyes, stepped into the storage wing and listened as Chief Briggs explained what had been found. The deputy took the pouch, the documents, and the hospital bracelet with the steady seriousness of someone who knew a family's life had just turned on a handful of paper. Caleb Ross stood near the gate now, watched by another deputy, his face pale under the red and blue lights. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply stared at the ground as if the mud had become the only place left to look. Deputy Reese asked him a question from a distance, calm and clear, and Caleb's answer was too faint for Isaiah to hear. But Atlas heard his voice. The dog turned his head, ears lifting once, then lowering again. There was no growl this time, only weariness. The danger had changed from fire to truth, and truth, once pulled into the open, did not need teeth. Denise carried the older boy toward the ambulance, and as she passed Mara, the child opened his eyes. They were gray-blue in the emergency light, unfocused, uncertain, but when Mara whispered, "Noah," his small hand moved from beneath the blanket and reached toward the sound. Mara broke then, but softly, with both knees sinking into the wet grass as she touched 2 fingers to his tiny hand. "I am here," she said, voice shaking so badly it almost disappeared. "I am here now." Lily knelt beside her mother and looked at the boy with solemn wonder. "He likes your voice," she said. Isaiah stood a few feet away with Atlas at his side, both of them soaked, ash-marked, and breathing through the last of the smoke. The fire behind them had dimmed to a deep orange glow, controlled now by water and patience. The barn would not survive the night whole, but the children had. The records had. The truth had. Atlas leaned against Isaiah's leg, and the Marine looked down to see the dog's eyes half closing at last. Isaiah rested his hand on the white shepherd's head, feeling heat, rain, ash, and a living pulse beneath his palm. For years, people had said Atlas reacted too strongly to cries, alarms, smoke, and fear. They had called it a flaw. Isaiah watched Mara hold her lost son's hand in the mist and knew better. Some wounds do not make a soul useless. They make it listen where everyone else has learned to turn away. The mist hung low over the yard, settling over the puddles and soft earth like a gentle curtain, carrying the lingering scent of rain, ash, and straw. Isaiah stood with Atlas at his side, both of them soaked, the dog's white fur streaked with gray and black from smoke, yet still glowing with vitality in the dim light. The barn had quieted, its flames now reduced to orange embers beneath the wet boards, and the air no longer carried the sharp heat that had once pressed against their faces. Mara knelt beside the small boy, Noah, whose tiny hand grasped hers with surprising strength for someone who had been hidden so long, and Lily leaned against her mother, her eyes wide, absorbing the miracle in silence. Isaiah's gaze followed Atlas as the dog moved slowly along the edge of the barn, sniffing, pausing, ears pivoting, sensing the subtle changes in the night that human senses could not register. The dog's movements were deliberate, each step a study in balance, each shift in weight a silent communication that guided Isaiah's thoughts. He crouched beside Atlas, letting his palm rest lightly on the dog's shoulder, feeling the warmth and the steady pulse beneath the fur. There was an unspoken understanding between them, forged through years of training, of missions carried out under fire, and of moments where instinct had been the only guide. The boy stirred again, a soft sigh escaping his lips, and Mara leaned closer, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead, her hands shaking but steady, her eyes full of tears that reflected relief, grief, and wonder all at once. Isaiah watched her, noticing the way the child's breath quickened at the contact, how his tiny fingers curled around Mara's, anchoring him to safety, and he felt a quiet surge of respect and awe for the bond between mother and son that had survived years of absence and uncertainty. Atlas shifted his stance, body low, ears forward, eyes bright, still attentive to the shadows and the faintest sounds around them, reminding Isaiah that while this moment was quiet, it was also fragile, and vigilance was still necessary. Chief Briggs stepped closer, his expression unreadable in the dim light, hands resting lightly on the hood of his jacket as he observed the scene, understanding the significance without words, sensing that the discovery of Noah and the careful extraction from the hidden space marked the turning point of the night. The deputies had arrived fully now, their vehicles forming a soft halo of light over the wet grass, but they waited respectfully, allowing the moment to unfold without interference, recognizing that some events required patience, attention, and the reverent acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. Caleb Ross remained near the gate, his posture stiff, eyes downcast. Yet Isaiah noticed a subtle shift in his shoulders as he watched Atlas and the children, a hint of comprehension crossing his features, the realization that the dog had uncovered more than anyone had anticipated, and that human plans had been upended by instinct, loyalty, and unwavering attention. The rain had eased further, leaving a gentle sheen on the leaves, the wooden boards, and the soft grass underfoot, each droplet catching the flicker of dying embers from the barn and casting tiny, ephemeral reflections. Mara held Noah closer, speaking softly, her voice low and reverent, the words carrying warmth and reassurance, while Lily leaned forward, eyes fixed on Atlas, understanding without comprehension the dog's role in this night's events. Isaiah stood and extended a hand, brushing his palm lightly along the dog's neck, feeling the heat, the ash, and the calm resolve that radiated from Atlas. For a long moment, they all simply stood there, in the quiet after fire and rain, letting the significance of survival, discovery, and connection settle over them. The children were safe, the truth uncovered, and the dog remained at Isaiah's side, vigilant, patient, and ever aware, a silent sentinel who had led them through uncertainty and guided them into the first fragile moments of dawn. The barn behind them now seemed less a place of threat and more a witness, its silhouette softened by smoke and mist, bearing testimony to the courage, intuition, and loyalty that had shaped the events of the night. Isaiah took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs, and knew that Atlas had once again reminded him why instinct and trust could surpass knowledge, why patience and observation could reveal what human eyes might miss, and why even in the darkest, wettest, and most uncertain hours, guidance and protection could come in forms both familiar and extraordinary. The first ambulance left Ashford Creek at 11:42 that night, its red lights fading down the wet county road with the baby boy and Noah inside, both wrapped in warmth, both watched by Denise Harper as if she were carrying pieces of the whole town's heart. Mara rode with them, one hand holding Lily's and the other resting near Noah's blanket, close enough for him to feel her without crowding the fragile space between discovery and belonging. Isaiah stood in the yard until the sound of the siren thinned into the hills. Atlas sat beside him at last, not because anyone told him to, but because his body had finally decided the worst part of the night was over. The white shepherd's shoulders sagged. His breathing came rough and slow. Rainwater dripped from the fur under his chin, carving clean lines through the ash. Isaiah knelt in the mud and checked his paws with careful hands. The pads were warm, tender, darkened by soot, but not badly harmed. Still, Isaiah felt a tightness in his throat when Atlas lifted one paw and placed it against his wrist, as if reassuring the man who was supposed to be reassuring him. "You did enough," Isaiah whispered. Atlas blinked once, tired and calm, but his ears turned toward the barn again. Even nearly burned down, the place still seemed to be speaking. Firefighters moved through the last pockets of smoke, their boots sinking into wet straw, their flashlights sweeping across beams, barrels, hanging tack, and the blackened outline of the false wall that had hidden the room. Deputy Alan Reese walked out carrying the canvas pouch inside a clear evidence bag, his expression solemn beneath the brim of his rain-darkened hat. Behind him, Chief Briggs held something smaller, wrapped in a towel to keep it dry. "Sergeant," Briggs said. Isaiah stood, one hand still resting on Atlas's head. Briggs opened the towel. Inside was a small cassette recorder, old and scuffed, its plastic case warped on one corner, but intact. Beside it was a stack of photographs bound with a rubber band and a folded letter sealed in a plastic sleeve. "Found it behind the tack cabinet," Briggs said. "Your dog kept circling that wall after you brought the boy out. We might have missed it if he had not gone back to the same spot." Isaiah looked down at Atlas. The dog did not move. His eyes stayed on the recorder. Deputy Reese pressed a gloved thumb against the play button. For a moment, there was only static, soft and crackling, like rain caught in a wire. Then a man's voice filled the damp air. It was weak, older, and heavy with regret. "Mara, if you ever hear this, forgive me for not being brave sooner." Chief Briggs went still. Isaiah saw Lily's little wooden train in the pocket of Briggs's coat, placed there for safekeeping, its blue paint catching a small flash of light. The recording continued. The voice belonged to Thomas Whitcomb, Mara's late husband. He spoke slowly, as though each word had cost him breath. He said Noah had not died at the hospital. He said papers had been switched, signatures forged, and a private arrangement buried under threats, money, and shame. He said he had believed the people who told him silence would protect Mara from more pain. He had been wrong. He had spent years trying to find the boy, following rumors across county lines, until the trail led back to their own land through Caleb Ross, who had once worked transport jobs between clinics, farms, and private homes. The details were not shouted. They were not dramatic. They were worse because they were plain. A husband confessing fear. A father confessing failure. A man trying, too late, to leave a door open for the truth. Isaiah listened without moving, feeling the cold night gather around his shoulders. Atlas leaned against him, steady now, as if keeping him rooted. The tape crackled again, and Thomas's voice softened. If Noah comes home one day, tell Lily her brother liked music before he ever knew words. Tell Mara I kept the blue train because I could not bury hope completely. The recording clicked off. No one spoke for several seconds. Even the firefighters stopped moving. The barn behind them exhaled a final ribbon of smoke into the mist. Deputy Reese lowered the recorder as if it were something fragile and sacred. Near the gate, Caleb stood beside a cruiser, watched by another deputy. His face had lost all its color. He did not protest when Reese turned toward him. Caleb Ross, we need you to come with us and answer questions at the station. The words were calm. No anger. No spectacle. Just the quiet weight of consequence arriving at last. Caleb looked once toward the barn, then toward Atlas, and something like defeat passed over him. He stepped into the back of the cruiser without a fight. Isaiah was grateful for that. The night had seen enough fear. When the cruiser door closed, Atlas let out a long breath and lowered himself to the ground. Isaiah immediately knelt beside him. Hey, stay with me. The dog's eyes were open, but heavy. His body had given everything it could give. Chief Briggs crouched on the other side, his rough face soft with concern. We can get him to the clinic. Dr. Patterson is all ready. On the way back from the hospital, Isaiah nodded and slid both arms beneath Atlas. Careful with the paws. Careful with the ribs. Careful with the dignity of an animal who had carried more than any living creature should have to carry. Atlas was not light, nearly 85 pounds of muscle, rain, and ash, but Isaiah lifted him as if he were something holy. As he carried him toward the second ambulance, the first gray hint of dawn began to gather beyond the hills. The fields of Ashford Creek glimmered with water. The ruined barn stood behind them, no longer burning, no longer hiding what it had held. Isaiah laid Atlas on a clean blanket inside the ambulance bay. The dog turned his head weakly and nosed the dog tags hanging from Isaiah's chest. For years, Isaiah had carried those tags like a reminder of every name he could not save. Tonight, for the first time, they felt different. Not lighter, not erased, but answered. He placed one tag gently against Atlas's collar and whispered, "You brought them home." Atlas closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in peace, while outside, over wet fields and blackened wood, morning arrived without applause. Dr. Patterson met the second ambulance before it reached the clinic doors, his gray coat pulled over his pajamas, his boots unlaced, his face still marked by sleep, until he saw Atlas lying on the blanket with Isaiah's dog tag resting against his collar. Then all softness left him except the kind that mattered. He moved quickly, checking the shepherd's paws, listening to his chest, wiping ash from the corners of his eyes with warm saline, while Isaiah stood close enough for Atlas to smell him. The small veterinary clinic sat 5 miles from Ashford Creek, beside a closed feed store and a church with a white steeple that had just begun to catch the first pale light of morning. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a heater clicked on with a tired rattle. Isaiah had known field hospitals louder than this, rooms full of alarms and orders and men pretending not to be afraid. But this quiet was harder. Atlas had done the impossible, and now all Isaiah could do was wait beside a metal exam table, one hand on the dog's shoulder, counting every breath as if counting could keep him here. Dr. Patterson wrapped Atlas's front paws in soft white bandages and gave him fluids through a small line beneath the skin. "He is exhausted," the veterinarian said. Smoke irritation, mild burns on the pads, a few singed spots, but his lungs sound better than I expected. Isaiah released a breath he did not know he had been holding. He will make it. Patterson looked at the dog, then at the Marine. After what I heard he did tonight, Sergeant, I am not betting against him. Atlas opened one eye at the sound of Isaiah's voice. His tail moved once beneath the blanket, barely enough to wrinkle the fabric. It was not much. It was everything. Isaiah lowered his forehead to the dog's head and closed his eyes. No speech came. No prayer he could shape. Only a silence full of names, Old Smoke, and the strange mercy of being given one more morning. By noon, word had moved through Ashford Creek the way wind moves through grass. Not loud at first. A message from a firefighter to his wife. A nurse calling her sister. A photograph of a white shepherd being carried through rain. By evening, people stood outside St. Agnes Medical Center with casseroles, blankets, stuffed animals, and paper cups of coffee gone cold in their hands. Mara stayed inside the pediatric wing with both children. Noah slept most of the day, waking only when he heard her voice. The baby, whose name was later confirmed through the records as Samuel, held on with the stubborn strength of all small things meant to live. Lily sat between their beds, reading picture books in a whisper, stumbling over words because she kept looking up to make sure her brothers were still there. When Isaiah finally came to the hospital that night, he did not wear dress blues or medals. He wore the same smoke-stained jacket, washed but still carrying the faint smell of fire. Atlas was not with him. The dog was under Dr. Patterson's care, sleeping deeply, wrapped in blankets donated by 3 different neighbors who all claimed theirs was the warmest. Mara met Isaiah in the hallway outside the children's room. For a moment, she could only look at him. Then she stepped forward and took his hands in both of hers. I do not know how to thank you, she said. Isaiah shook his head gently. Thank him. Mara smiled through tears. I will spend the rest of my life doing that. Behind the glass, Noah stirred in his sleep, and Lily placed the little blue wooden train on his bedside table. It looked small there, chipped and ordinary, but everyone who saw it understood that hope had a shape now. 2 weeks later, Ashford Creek gathered behind the church where the fields opened wide, and the rebuilt morning smelled of cut hay, coffee, and clean rain. The barn was gone, reduced to a charred foundation that would one day become something new, but beside it the town had set a temporary fence with white ribbons tied along the rails. Isaiah arrived in his truck with Atlas in the passenger seat, the shepherd's paws wrapped, his fur brushed clean, his coat white again except for one faint gray patch near his left ear where smoke had left a permanent shadow. When Atlas stepped down, the crowd fell quiet without being asked. He moved slowly but proudly, leaning a little against Isaiah's leg. Mara came forward carrying Samuel, while Noah walked beside her, holding Lily's hand. The boy was still thin, still quiet, still learning the world, but when he saw Atlas, he let go of Lily and took 3 small steps across the grass. Isaiah started to caution him, but Atlas lowered himself gently to the ground before anyone needed to speak. Noah knelt and placed both hands on the dog's neck. Atlas closed his eyes. The whole field seemed to exhale. Chief Briggs removed his hat. Denise Harper wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Dr. Patterson pretended to inspect Atlas's bandage so no one would notice his eyes. Mara whispered, "He remembers." Isaiah watched Noah rest his forehead against the white shepherd's fur and felt something in himself finally come home too. The fire had not erased what was lost. It had not made every wound clean. Grace never works that way. It does not undo the darkness. It walks into it, finds what is still breathing, and carries it back into the light. As the sun lowered over Ashford Creek, Atlas lay in the grass with Isaiah's dog tag still fixed to his collar, Lily leaning against one side of him, Noah against the other, Samuel asleep in Mara's arms nearby. Isaiah stood a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, no longer listening for voices trapped in smoke. For the first time in years,